Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Luke here with your DFS and prop preview for Thursday Night Football between the Rams and the 49ers. Gonna make sure you're ready for all of tomorrow night's action. But first off, a look at the DFS side and what I'm doing out there for my GPP lineups. That'll include an injury report, a look at some of the ownership trends, some of the diamonds of the rough towards the bottom end of the board that I'm playing. And then afterwards, a focus on the prop side of things and a few props over there on Underdog and Prize Picks that have already entered myself that you might want to consider adding to a few slips of your own. So by the end, you'll have a good idea of how to attack all of your exposure for Thursday. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing started off right. But first off, a look at the DFS side. The injury report could be active the next day or so as we've got some key injuries heading into lock. So first and foremost would be Isaac Guerendo for the 49ers. He is questionable, did not practice over there on Tuesday. So getting that designation late over here tonight or potentially in the early hours tomorrow is something that could really change up the running back situation for San Fran. Of course, he's been filling in as that running back number one. And if he were to be out, that would give a lot of usage out there to Patrick Taylor Jr., who has been priced up for the occasion over there at $7,400, and even a Keyshawn Vaughn, who we haven't talked about very often, at least over the last year or so, used to be over there in the Tampa Bay Bucks, but he would be in line as your running back too if you had Guerendo rolled out. So that's the one major piece of injury news that we're going to want to monitor out there before lock. But also Demarcus Robinson, who did not practice on Tuesday, his status is still up in the air at this point. And then even a Davis Allen down here at $1,200, tight end out there for the LA Rams, is also questionable heading into lock. I would say that Allen more than likely going to play, but guys like a Robinson and then Guerendo, especially $8,400, are much more up in the air. So of course, guys, that is something that you're going to want to pay attention to out there in your lineups. As if Guerendo's rolled out, first off, don't play him out there in your builds, but even more importantly, guys like a Taylor, even Keyshawn Vaughn that are super cheap, become viable out there in your lineups as well. So I always like to start there, set the tone out there with the injury report. But in terms of your game script, relatively high total between these two teams, so nearly a 50-point over-under on most of those major books. You do have the home team, the 49ers, as 3-point favorites on most of those books as well, but I don't think you're going to see a massive bias ownership-wise. You're going to get some people playing the favorites over there on the 49ers, but with Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, or Stafford over there at quarterback, even Kyren Williams, they're $10,200, are all going to get their fair share of attention as well. So it's not the sort of slate where you're going to get a lot of people paying like 4-2 49er stacks or even 5-1 49er stacks, as the spread is a lot closer than you have in those kind of situations, and we have that high total game script. Rather, what I think will be a little bit more popular out there for tomorrow night is going to be the high scoring passing script out there. You're going to see a lot of people playing both quarterbacks, trying to take one or even two skill position players from each team, whether that's a Puka or a Kupp out there for LA, maybe Williams that you're using as that elite skill position player, and then one guy over here for San Fran as well. And what you'll notice about the San Fran skill position guys is that they're really cheap, especially Deebo Samuel down here at $7,600. So building with both quarterbacks, one of those elite players up top, and then maybe it's a Jennings, a Kittle, or a Samuel down here at $7,600, it is really easy to build that way. So when you have the close spread, you have that high total, my intuition tells me that that's where a lot of the ownership is going to come in. And what you can see over here on the ownership tabs is that is exactly the case. You've got a lot of ownership coming in on these quarterbacks, whether it's at flex or the captain position, and then these cheap players on San Fran, and even these top tier guys like a Kupp and Nacua especially, are some of your chalkiest players that we have on the slate. So if you're going to play in those large field GPPs, if you're looking to get different compared to what everyone else is doing, play for a lower scoring game script. An easy way to do so would be to play Kyren Williams, maybe even go with a 4-2 Rams stack, a little bit of correlation hoping that they pull off the upset, or even vice versa. Let's assume that Guerendo ends up being active, maybe assuming that the home favorites, the 49ers, that would be go out there and win it handedly in a lower scoring game script. Maybe he would be the optimal captain in that sort of lineup. That would be the way to get different, because I just see so many people jamming in both of those quarterbacks and then probably trying to take a receiver or tight end to captain. But now let's go player by player, give you guys an idea of how I'll be using each of these sort of players. And let's start with Puka here at 11 grand, who it's expensive, but I think it's warranted with the kind of production that he's been posting. You can see nearly a 2x points per dollar value despite being 11 grand, which is something that we don't say very often. So of course that 21.3 point raw projection is doing a lot of that help there at 11 grand, but whether it's a captain or the flex position, if you can make it work salary wise, I don't see a reason to get off Puka Nacua. He's not the sort of play that I'm actively looking to get well over the field on, or that I'm looking to go over there and get under the field on. I would say if anything, I'd be looking to get over the field if I can, but at this sort of price tag, at about 54% ownership, I'm not going to be locking him in every single lineup to get leverage. So if I'm getting over the field, it'll probably be like 65, maybe 70% Puka Nacua, but I'm probably looking at about 60% combined ownership. So that would be about matching the field out there on Puka. So again, I think he's a solid play. You kind of fit him in where you can, but at $11,000, especially if you're going with 16,500 at captain, there is a lot of opportunity cost in taking a player that expensive. So he's maybe not my favorite option on the slate just because he is coming at high ownership as well, but I think that he's not somebody that I would avoid out there in lineups either. So I think there's a time and place for using Puka tomorrow, but is priced up for the occasion. Speaking of price tag, it goes down rather significantly from Puka to your next player. It's a whole $800 gap down there to Kyren Williams at 10,200, which I think is very fair given his production in the first game between these two. He had nearly 30 rushes and over 30 total touches over there in the first game against the 49ers. So it's a matchup that is a little bit softer on the ground. Perhaps that's why you saw more Kyren Williams, but I will remind you that in that first matchup early in the year, that the Rams didn't have Kupp or Nacua out there at wide receiver. So I think it's going to play a little bit differently than what you saw the first time around. So it could go that same way. We don't want to completely eliminate that sort of outcome. So I don't think I'm as high on Kyren as a lot of other people are going to be, but he is at least somebody you want to consider out there in those lineups. So kind of like Puka, I don't see myself completely avoiding a Kyren Williams tomorrow, but he's maybe not my favorite play just because I see them being a little bit more pass heavy. Which speaking of, by the way, I mentioned the chalky game script being more pass heavy. That is kind of unfortunate for somebody like myself. If I tend to agree with that kind of sentiment, which I do out there for tomorrow night, I'm probably going to have to avoid a lot of those large field GPPs, especially with some of my higher dollar stuff. Like I'm not going to go out there and enter the 150 max, the 25 or anything like that. I'm not going to put that kind of financial backing on this sort of slate. Rather, I'll take the $1,000 of entries that I'm looking to enter tomorrow and scatter them across some single entries where I don't have to be as crazy about the ownership. So yeah, Kyren Williams, if you're high on him out there for tomorrow, there is some leverage to be had. He's only 8% at captain, which comparatively is a lot lower than where he's come in on other showdown slates, where he's closer to like 15 to maybe even 20%, partially because they're underdogs, but also partially because Puka's been on such a run, right? He's like 15.5% owned. Cooper Kupp getting his attention. These quarterbacks close to 10% ownership in both cases. That's why you have such low ownership out there on Kyren. So I don't want to completely dismiss him. Maybe if you're a little bit more optimistic about that rushing game, you go in that direction. The Cooper Kupp here at 10 grand is probably my favorite play for some leverage up top. So he doesn't project nearly as well as Nacua. In fact, that's both from the raw projection and the points per dollar standpoint. Despite being a whole $1,000 cheaper, he is only a 1.5x points per dollar value. So in my big cash lineups, I'm not going to be playing a Cooper Kupp, but in large field GPPs, some of my $100, maybe $200 single entries, I'm going to be considering using Kupp for leverage because in those sort of contests, he's going to be even lower owned than what you have here. This, of course, is the large field GPP ownership that we have over here on this right side, which will change as we get up to lock. So, of course, guys, make sure to check out the Patreon page for all the up-to-date projections to see exactly where the latest run has all of these players. But somebody like Cooper Kupp, this is the GPP ownership, as I just mentioned. It's single entries, the stuff where you're spending 100, sometimes even $200 per entry. He's going to be even lower owned because people play scared in those sort of contests. They play a lot tighter when they're playing over $100 an entry, and especially when that's in the single entry kind of format. So Cooper Kupp, the projection might be a little bit lower than just about everyone else around him, but if you're looking to get different in that kind of contest, at the flex position, there's a chance that Kupp is sub 20% in some of those contests, that he's sub 5% owned out there in captain in some of those contests. And if you were to use him, maybe still stay on the really chalky script. Maybe you're using Kupp at captain, something like that, to try and get a lot of leverage to the field. You can still use both quarterbacks. You can still throw in a relatively chalky Juwan Jennings as a buyback and have leverage because you used Cooper Kupp at captain. So I think there's a time and place for using this sort of play, but even though his points per dollar projections may be a hair lower than some of the other guys around him, I think that there's a chance for him to go out there and find some success. Got both of these quarterbacks here, so kind of like a Puka up top, I would not recommend fading either one of these quarterbacks. You kind of play them where it makes sense. So in your large field GPP lineups, just make sure that you're pairing them up with at least one pass catcher, because especially Stafford doesn't have that much rushing upside. Purdy has shown a lot more this year, but still you probably want at least one pass catcher with both, if not two, out there with Stafford. Just make sure that you're correlating them properly. So if you're going to play that high scoring passing script, you're probably going to have both of them in lineups, and then 1-2 pass catchers paired up on either side. Speaking of my favorite plays on the slate, Juwan Jennings, if he's only going to be like 40% combined ownership, is probably going to be my favorite play on the slate, especially for single entries, that sort of thing. The last time these two teams played, Juwan Jennings went for over 150 receiving yards. While that is completely unsustainable, we should not expect that to happen again. The Rams are a bottom 5 defense in the NFL when it comes to allowing fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So it's one of the best matchups that we have in football. They're the home team, so they're the favorites out here for Thursday Night Football. Relatively high total game. I like all of that for Juwan Jennings. So maybe it's the matchup that was really good out there for him. He should see even more usage this time around, as when they played the first time, they still had Brandon Ayuk playing. So that took away some of the snaps and usage for Jennings, and yet he still went out there for over 150 yards. If he's only going to be 10% at captain as well, I'm going to be looking to get over the field on that too. So of course, guys, these ownership projections are as of, a Wednesday afternoon right now. So there's still some time for these to change over the next day or so, but if he stays in this sort of range, about 42-43% combined ownership, I'm going to be thrilled to get over the field on Jennings. Guerendo, somebody that we're going to have to monitor from the injury perspective, but if he plays, he's shown us some receiving upside out of the backfield. Went out there, scored twice last week, so he would certainly be in play there at $8,400. And if you're looking to play like that 49ers script, I would say if there's a running back that I was going to get over the field on, if I was going to play a running back, especially at captain out there in my single entries, it would probably be Guerendo if he's active. The reason for that, the 49ers are favorites. The game script a little bit more likely to favor Guerendo than what you have on the other side there with Kyren. And also, he's a lot cheaper than what you have there with Kyren Williams. So you're not asking him to go out there and score 30 DraftKings points to go out there and be the optimal captain. Probably something closer to like 20 to maybe 25 points to be the optimal captain, which I think is well within his range of outcomes. Over here on the San Fran side, you also have these other two elite tier skill position guys in a Kittle and a Deebo Samuel. Worth noting that the price tag on Samuel has gone borderline ridiculous at this point, down there at just $7,600. Kittle at $8,000, I think it's fair. He's had some really good games recently, so he's seen a little bit of a price increase. Despite that, nearly a 2x points per dollar value. Deebo Samuel actually a little bit lower in terms of the points per dollar value, which is surprising given he's only $7,600, but at a certain point, right, you've gone too far when it comes to lowering this price tag. And I think at $7,600, even $11,400 out there at captain, that he's live, even with some of the struggles recently. Patrick Taylor, he's really only a play if we have Guerendo rolled out. The reason for that, of course, is because he's overpriced with that injury news on Guerendo. So somebody that we're really going to have to monitor that news on over the next day. These two kickers are always decent plays, never really options that I'm looking to get well over the field on. So with Moody and Cardi, I see myself matching the field on both of those sort of guys. A Ricky Pearsall here at $4,800. This is when you're getting into GPP flyer range. So if Demarcus Robinson plays, I would categorize him in this same sort of category here, where Pearsall, Robinson, you really only play them in the large field GPPs. It's a single entries cash. I'd rather have kickers actually out there in that kind of format. But large field GPPs, a Pearsall or Robinson ends up getting into the end zone, there's a really good chance that they're going to be in the optimal lineup. So obviously lower percentage outcomes for those kind of guys to go out there and score, but certainly within their range of outcomes. The defenses, if you're going with the lower scoring game script, so in large field GPPs, especially if I'm going with the 49ers side, like if I'm going to use Guerendo captain, maybe I'm correlating that with a little bit of 49ers defense. And if you're going with Kyren Williams, you're believing in him tonight, like maybe you want to correlate that with some Rams defense. So I think that if you're in the large field GPPs, that I'd be considering a Rams or a 49ers, but not so much out there in my single entries or my higher dollar stuff. Keyshawn Vaughn, I think that he's really dependent on Guerendo being out, but if he is, he'll be a GPP flyer there at $3,400. Blake Corum has been seeing a lot more snaps for the Rams of late, but not the best points per dollar value at just about 1.1x. At large field GPPs, he could get there with a short yardage touchdown. He's been a really powerful short yardage back for them, especially on like 3rd and short and 4th and short. So it wouldn't completely mind blow me for him to go out there and score one of those 1-2 yard touchdowns. That would be his avenue out there to the optimal lineup. A player that I like a little bit more for some value down low would be the 2.4x points per dollar value that we have here on Tutu Atwell. So the projection's not going to be earth-shattering at about 6.2 points, but at just $2,600, that is really solid down low. So I think in like single entries cash, this is where a lot of people are going to land in their lineups. The ownership's higher. You can see comparatively, he's much, much higher owned than just about everyone else around him, but there's a reason for that, as he has by far the best floor of all these other guys down here. So if you're playing a cash, this single entry kind of format, I think he's a no-brainer to use for some leverage. Not leverage, for some salary savings towards the bottom, but you're not going to get any leverage on him towards the bottom. Outside of that, you got Juszczyk. If you do have Guerendo rolled out, I think that Juszczyk could be used a little bit more down there in the red zone. So perhaps a little bit of an X factor that most won't consider if Guerendo is in fact rolled out. You've got Colby Parkinson here with Higbee rolled out. Could be in line as the number 1 tight end again, especially if Davis Allen were to be rolled out last second. Tyler Johnson, Saubert, Long, and then Cowing down here at the minimum price. These sort of guys are just pure punts at the very best. Personally, I might play a little bit of Tyler Johnson, and by a little bit, I mean like 5% out there in my 150 max. But guys like a Saubert, a Long, and a Cowing, like maybe I get to 3 to 5% Hunter Long, but there's next to no chance that I'm playing these guys down here. So what I'm more so doing for value would be guys like maybe a Parkinson is my last man in, maybe taking a shot on a Juszczyk if I really want to get different down low. But Atwell, some of these guys, like the kickers, like they're going to be some spots where they'll be my second to maybe last man into lineups. A lot of balanced lineups because we don't have a lot of punts here. So that's what I'm looking at out there for Thursday Night Football. My single entries, my cash, going with both quarterbacks, some higher scoring stuff, large field GPPs, trying to get different with some lower scoring scripts. And now for the prop side of things, where I've got 3 props I've already entered, you might want to keep an eye on yourself. So first prop we're going to go through here is going to be the over on Matthew Stafford passing yards. He's at 241.5 over there on Underdog. And the reason why I like that is, first off, in the first matchup, he had over 220 passing yards, and that was without Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp in the lineup. You got them as underdogs as the road against the 49ers, so perhaps could be forced to pass a little bit more there. But I think having Kupp and Nacua back is also massive out there for his production. If you take a look at his passing totals, his passing touchdown totals to begin the year, they were pretty much non-existent. He was one of the worst quarterbacks out there in the NFL. Ever since getting both of those weapons back at wide receiver, he's been one of the most productive quarterbacks that we've had throughout the NFL. So I think if you're looking at that first matchup and you're taking too much stock out of that you're probably doing things a little bit incorrectly. So I think that is massive out there for Stafford. He's at 245.5 yards over there on Prize Picks. A few other books around the industry even have him at 246.5 yards. So the matchup ideal, you also have all of his skill position guys there. And in fact, on the live video here, you can see that one got bumped. So even at 242.5, in fact, that's actually what I took for my own slip there. It's not the worst value that you can go out there and mix in, but yeah, that 241.5 would have been a little bit nicer. Next prop we're going to go through is this over on Brock Purdy, which this was actually an even prop before, so it just got this 0.94x multiplier. It does take the payout a little bit lower, but it's not the worst multiplier by any means. What I like here with this over, though, is the fact that he's minus 130 for the over on a lot of those different books. It could potentially be without Isaac Guerendo. If Guerendo's rolled out, there's a good chance they have to be a little bit more passing heavy, and that they're not going to have that red zone big bulky running back to go out there and score very easily. Rather, they could have to rely on some gadget plays, maybe Brock Purdy passing a little bit more down in that portion of the field, which is why I was considering that over. So you had that plus EV value, potentially Guerendo getting rolled out, which that's an X factor. We don't know which direction that's going to go. But yeah, this didn't have a multiplier before, so a little bit annoying that they added that. On Prize Picks, this didn't have a multiplier, though. So I think the Stafford prop, you're going to get a few yards higher if you decided to take it over there, but you're not going to get that multiplier on Purdy. Jennings, though, is also a few yards higher. So as of right now, I would probably still play this over here on the underdog side. But for any of you over there on Prize Picks, they are at least at similar numbers over there on that site. Then the last prop we're going to go through is this over on Juwan Jennings receiving yards. So he's at 68.5 on DraftKings, I think 69.5 over there on FanDuel. A lot of the other books around the industry have him at least 1 or 2 yards higher. And the last time these two teams played, he went for over 150 receiving yards. And what you'll know about Jennings is that the defense against the Rams not only got burnt by him, but they've been burnt the entire year. In fact, they're bottom 5 at defending opposing wide receivers. So Jennings, who's got a solid matchup, they're favorites, so they're expecting the 49ers to be relatively effective there on the offensive side. And he's been the best wide receiver for them over here in 2024. So obviously Deebo Samuel has been a little bit disappointing lately. On the other side of things, it's been Jennings picking up a lot of that slack. So with a little bit of line value, some correlation between these three, obviously they're all overs. So if this goes over, it's already high total of about 50 points. Could be in a really good spot to go out there and hit with these three. So of course, guys, for all of these props, as soon as I'm entering them, to get the best, most up-to-date value humanly possible, make sure to check out my Patreon page, as there's probably going to be a lot more exposure than I'm getting to before lock tomorrow. So make sure to join over there. It's $15 a month to get all the exposure I'm getting to, including all the reasoning behind the prop slips as well. So give you guys a little bit of a peek into my projection process, also what I'm doing for correlation, the idea behind not just the props that I'm taking, but how I'm structuring the different slips that I'm going with as well. Make sure to check out the Patreon page for all of that analysis and all the different slips that I'm taking there before lock. But on Prize Picks, as I mentioned before, you can take the similar lines on these three players. Payout, though, I'm not sure on. Might actually still be higher over here on the underdog side. So make sure to compare those, get the best lines available whenever you're watching this. If you're watching this over here on Wednesday, probably going to see a lot of similar numbers. But if you're watching this on Thursday, things may have moved a little bit. So just make sure you're doing your line shopping, get the best line possible available, and that'll be it out there for Thursday Night Football. That's all I've got for the Thursday Night Football preview. Before you're hopping out of here, go ahead and smash that like button for me. Also, subscribe to the channel and comment down below who you've got as your top scorer out there for tomorrow night. If you give me the top DraftKings scorer on the slate, you will win a free month on my Patreon page, as long as you can get that player and their actual score within 2 fantasy points. So go ahead, claim your player down below and your guess for their fantasy score. And if multiple people end up getting the same player for tomorrow, you're going to have the closest guess. So if you both get it within 2, may the best go out there and win. Early bird gets the worm. Go ahead, claim your player down below. But that's all I've got out there for tomorrow night's slate. Should be a fun one. Divisional matchup, relatively high scoring if the spread and that total ends up coming true. If it does, should be a pretty good night out there for our exposure. So best of luck out there with everything that you guys are going with, and may you guys find yourselves towards the top of those GPPs.